Are we ready for action? Okay. Are we ready for action? Thank you, thank you. So this is our final panel of the afternoon, and I'm really excited because I feel like I've not been on the panel for a few hours, so I'm back where I'm supposed to be. I'm right back at home. So can we have a warm welcome to Paul Myers, Dr. Paul Myers from Farm Urban. We also have Dave Anderson from Rough Trade. We have Hazel Roundon from shedkm Architects, and we also have John Moffatt from Capital and Centric. Big round of applause, guys. Hazel, I'm going to start with you first. So shedkm are Liverpool-born practice with a second base in London, working on projects UK-wide, including placemaking and pioneers in retrofit? See, my English is terrible. What's retrofit?
Is this working?
Yeah.
It's the regeneration of existing buildings, really. So
okay.
Reuse of existing.
Why does everything have to be so complicated? Why not just say reuse do up old buildings? Now it makes me feel like
everything has a word.
So can you tell us more about shedkm, please?
We grew out of Liverpool 27 years ago. So very much started with a group of graduates that thought we'll give it a go ourselves, and if we can't make it work, we'll go and work for someone else. And over the years, we struck up a very good relationship early days with Urban Splash. So very much about regeneration, and just really grew in the city from good graduates that didn't necessarily want to go back to London, but wanted to work at a good practice, I'd like to think. And then we've kind of grown other clients, such as the man sat next to me, Capital and Centric over the years. Post 2008, we went down to London as well, and we realised that we needed to sort of take some of the lessons learned in the Northwest on value-driven projects down to the capital, and now we tend to work across the country.
I know it's interesting when you say about taking what you've learned up in the Northwest down south, because there's always this notion that down south is educating us up north. But when you guys transitioned down south, what was that like in terms of what areas did you cover, and was there a need for shedkm down south?
Yeah, I think we offered something different. I think, the first job we went for, they said to us, what would you do with 1,600 a square metre build cost? And we were used to 1,000, so we were just rubbing our hands thinking, this is amazing. And I think that it's a really good point, because I think a lot of innovation actually comes out of the north. I think because you have to work harder from the start, you have to make really low budgets work. And, just places like this, be creative about how you transform and deliver projects. So when we went down to London, we didn't immediately start working on central London office schemes. Not sure we'd want to anyway, but we had a London base, and we were working in places like East Croydon, due for regeneration. We went down to Brighton. We were out in parts of East London where there's challenges that are very much like northern cities, but with different values.
Okay, I like that. John, let me come to you. Capital and Centric, what do you do, and why is it important in terms of what place and community means?
Well, first of all, I have to say, the first time I met Paul, we were speaking together at a Liverpool University Careers Fair, and Paul was on the stage before me, and there were 3 people in the crowd. And when I got up and took the mic, all 3 stood up and left. So Paul sat down and said, can you present to me? So I'm delighted at the turnout, because it's more than I am used to. A little bit about CNC. As was Paul's. CNC, what do we do? We are social impact developers. And that sounds very nice, airy-fairy, or a bit corporate. But actually, it is genuinely the driving ethos behind the business that we want to deliver lasting positive social change, and we use the built environment to do that. So hopefully, if you ever come across one of our developments, you'll find that it engages you, and that there's architecture that's interesting, and that there's a sense of place and community to it. But there's a whole wrap around to our developments, that we're not just driven around kind of financial metrics, but actually we assess ourselves on a kind of social impact metric as well. So for us, success in a development is not just about the financial return, but it's about what it does for the community.
Yeah. And what's your area? What area do you cover? Is it mainly northwest? Is it down south? How does it work?
So we started, I personally am a Scouser, born and bred in the city. The company's headquartered in Manchester, but we work across the UK now.
Cool. Paul, you know, because John mentioned your name.
Yep.
Doesn't Paul have good hair? Like, it's sickening, honestly. But I bet you get told that all the time.
No, never.
Farm urban.
Yeah.
I don't want to make because obviously I've known you for a while and I've seen your progress. But for the people in the audience, yeah, tell us a little bit about farm urban and where the idea and the inspiration came from.
Yeah, so Farm Urban's a social enterprise based in Liverpool. So we've been going for about 10 years now. So founded by myself and Jens. And I think, so my background's in like human health, and I found myself working for the US government, watching them spend billions and billions of dollars developing drugs, and I wouldn't even call them treatments, just management regimes for chronic disease. And it just felt very wrong to me. And like my research was saying, if people ate better food, were healthier, got outside more, were less stressed, then you could literally do away with half of this nonsense that is quite financially incentivized. So I came back from the US, and I was either going to move to Scotland and buy a piece of land and go off-grid, or stay in the city and do something interesting around food. And that's how Farm Urban was born. And then since then, we've kind of moved into education. At the core of it is kind of growing food in cities. So we use something called vertical farming, which is growing upwards instead of horizontally. And primarily we use hydroponics, so it's water-based. There's a little system over there you can go and have a look at. And then more recently, we're trying to take on larger projects, kind of really similar to what John was saying, like how can we use food growing and community engagement and education and embed that into the fabric of society to really shift and change environments to make them healthier, more sustainable places to be in, to kind of nudge that healthier habits.
Now, I'm assuming, because it's a fantastic concept that, you know, has been working, but I can imagine the conversations at the beginning weren't so inspiring in terms of trying to get investment.
Yeah, well, I think everyone just thought we were totally mad initially. They loved the idea and thought, oh, that's interesting or weird, so they listened to you. And so I think we spent like the first 2 or 3 years, not really, we didn't earn any money, but we had to put a lot of sweat equity in to prove that we could. It wasn't just an idea.
Yeah.
So like we got a couple of grand from the university and put a first rooftop aquaponic system up there, and then we got a bit of money from Alder Hay and put some systems in there, and then it's just kind of slowly, organically grown year on year since then. And people, I think, have got more trust and confidence in us and the projects, and I think just generally the whole zeitgeist changed a bit. People are more open to that kind of thing and want to see it more.
In terms of community, what do you think Farm Urban brings? Or place even?
It's a really good question. I go one of two ways. One is like food. So for me, food is such a powerful way to connect people, and it's such a leveler. Like, it doesn't really matter where you're from, like what you look like, your financial background. You can bring a lot of different people together around good food. And there's also we've been doing a lot around like heritage of food and working with different communities and what food relates to their heritage. And then there's a lot of sharing takes place there. So the food is massive, but then also education, I think, is really important in what we do. And it's how we create a sense of community and bring people together. Yeah. And it's not like preachy. Like, we're not telling people what you're doing is bad. It's like, it's discovery and understanding and learning and removing a lot of barriers, because there's a lot of barriers in the way for a lot of people.
So true. I want to come to you, Dave. Rough Trade. Oh, sorry, it is Rough Trade.
Yeah.
Opened, was it last week?
The 18th, so a couple of weeks ago now, yeah.
Right opposite BBC. So we've been watching.
Neighbours, yeah.
We have been watching the whole refurbishment and everything. Why Liverpool? Does everyone know Rough Trade? No? Can you touch on Rough Trade?
So we are a independent chain of record stores and music venues, and we start with one little shop which was employee owned in West London in 1976, and have always been part of kind of the grassroots music industry, predominantly in London to start with, and then kind of the mid 2010s, 2014, we did our first store outside of London in Nottingham. And then we moved to Bristol in 2017, and Liverpool's been the most recent store we opened. And we also opened in Berlin on the same day, glutton for punishment. And we also have a store in New York as well. And each one of our stores, apart from our West London store, have got gig venues in all the stores as well, which are really small, sub 300 capacity gig venues too. It's a fun place to work.
So, I mean, the question on everyone's lips was why Liverpool and not Manchester?
Yeah, it would have been a closer commute for me if it was in Manchester. Why Liverpool? So I think Liverpool has always had this incredible independent spirit, which is something we've been very, very, has really been part of our kind of ethos since we started. We've also always had a very kind of DIY ethos as well, which is definitely something which we felt was really part of the fabric of the Liverpool music community. And the heritage and the musical heritage in Liverpool is incredible. Obviously, everybody knows the Beatles came from Liverpool. Yeah. But, you've got Echo and the Bunnymen, you've got the Lars, you've got bands like the Wombats, for example, you've got Cast, you've got Hot Club de Paris, you've got loads of incredible bands and artists which, came from Liverpool from the mid-50s and are continue to coming out of Liverpool today. In the cities we're in, we've always been really, really ingrained in the grassroots music community and the creative industries. And that's something which we really wanted to bring to Liverpool when we came to Liverpool. We didn't want to be this brand which had kind of come out of London and opened a site in Liverpool and kind of slapped London all over it. We wanted to be able to do something which was really ingrained in the local community and really work to support the local grassroots music community. And our employees in all of our stores a lot of them are music artists, a lot of them work in grassroots in venues as side jobs, or they've been in bands, or they've worked at labels, or they have friends and family who are in the industry, and so that whole kind of independent spirit and independent community is something which we really, really wanted to ensure we could continue doing, and we felt Liverpool was probably better for that than Manchester.
So last week, I was hosting a panel for Sound City, and one of the topics that kept on coming up was about artists, especially up and coming artists, and the lack of venues for them to play because venues are losing money. Yeah. So how do you kind of maintain that kind of community of up and coming artists while still, this is quite a loaded question, while still trying to make money? Because money is everything.
No, of course.
It's not everything, money isn't everything. But you've got bills to pay.
Well, if you're not making money, you can't pay your staff and you can't keep the stores open. We have record shops attached to our venues. That's kind of a really big part of it. And, our events are split kind of down the middle. 50% of our bookings come from our central events team, and they work really closely with not major labels but the bigger independent labels, and we'll book things like a Jordan Rakai show, or we'll do something with Charlie XCX, or we'll do something really, really big which generates a lot of turnover, which means that our local bar and events teams have the autonomy to book shows that they want to book, to promote artists they want to promote. Amazing. To really invest back into that local music community as well. And, the links that we have with record labels as well also help us to support newer artists that are at the beginning of their journey much more easily, because we have better access to them to get them into our stages as well. So without the record shop side of things and doing the slightly bigger shows, we might struggle, because it is incredibly hard to run a music venue these days. I mean, look at Co-op Live. That's not even off the ground yet, and we're trying to open a 300 capacity music venue in Rough Trade. I know how hard that can be, so I can't even imagine what a 23,500 cap venue is like. But for someone who used to be the CEO of that business coming out and saying grassroots music venues are poorly managed is absolutely not the case. And without them, you wouldn't be able to fund these massive venues, because the massive artists need to come from somewhere. They need to start them at the ground up. And that's why it's so important that we continue to operate our venues with these local artists in these local communities.
And it's crazy because I've worked in the States quite a bit as well, especially going to Atlanta, and you still get the big artists performing in the smaller spaces, you know, having those nice intimate gigs, because I think they understand the importance. They remember, actually, this is where I've started, and that kind of support for the smaller venues. So, you know, it's important. Hazel, I want to come back to you. In terms of, let me go back. Don't be looking at me questions. It's not even a tricky one. I might just change it now that you've looked at it. How important is culture and community for shedkm? Because it's all about architecture. You know, when you're planning a new project or when you're working on a project, how important is it that it reflects the community around them? They feel like they're part of that. And the reason why I asked that question is because I know when the BBC was moving to Salford, we had to do so much work with the community around there, so they didn't feel like they were being pushed out. But I don't know if that worked a lot. But yeah, how involved do you get the community, and do you have those kind of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, place-led regeneration is everything to us, so it's never a blank canvas. And, you know, even if it feels like it's an empty, derelict site, there was a building there once, there was a community there once. So bringing that forward is everything. We do that through engagement. Every master plan we do, we really try to promote culture, a cultural building, if we can, because that enables you to bring the public-private investments together. But community-orientated, I mean, I always say that as master planners, architects, placemakers, whatever you want to title what we do, we're the mediators, really. We mediate a vision with a reality. We mediate between an existing inherent community with newcomers coming in, and the community aspect of that is really important. I always say that successful schemes are never imposed on a place. They grow out of a place. Yeah. So the grain of the place inspires them in the first place.
What kind of project gives you butterflies?
A Capital and Centric one, apparently. I think any mixed use opportunity to grow a community, I would say. I mean, it's been quite interesting listening to the other guys, because that can come from anywhere, really. Yeah. We've got a scheme in Wandsworth at the moment, which interestingly I'd never known Wandsworth had such a big music scene. And, you know, the challenge for us there is, how do we do a residential-led scheme and keep the venues and keep the young initiatives to bring people into the music industry? So that, for me, is gives me butterflies. You know, another one we're working on is where there's a big public park. How do you suddenly develop lots of residential units without it being a gated community? Yeah. It's a public park, so we've got to make that public aspect run through. I think every project we take on inspires us, because it's about, it's usually a challenge. You know, I think we don't get the really easy briefs. I don't think we ever have.
Well, you know, you look like someone that loves a challenge. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, you know, if anyone's going to inspire change, then they've got to be inspired themselves. So, it's whatever kind of vision we can put to it.
I remember when I first moved to Manchester, the apartment that I was in, at the bottom, I can't remember who the company was. I don't know, you might, but I was in the Chips apartment, which is in Ancoats, which is, I think, is like, it's posh now, it's New Islington, but it was Ancoats and it was rough. And at the bottom of my apartment, it was like a studio, and you could go in and see what they were making, and they had like 3D printers. We don't really get that now. Most apartments, you get gyms. I'm not knocking the gyms, but there was a bit of creativity because I used to love inviting people and saying, come into this room and check out what they're printing this time, you know. So I think for me, it's definitely that case of not educating. Actually, yeah, I don't mind a bit of innovation and educating, but letting people know, like, if there's businesses that can be down, like a farm urban in an apartment, to kind of say, look, this is what we're doing, this is what you could be part of. Yeah. I love that kind of stuff instead of your average gyms all the time.
Yeah, the ground plane is everything. You know, I always say, if we've studied for long enough, we should be able to stack apartments. We should be able to get that right. But you've absolutely got to work with other people in collaboration to mediate what the ground plane's all about.
Yeah. John, coming back to you, what do you think makes a great place? Not a good place, a great place.
Can I just quickly come back on just some of the points that were made earlier, and then I'll come to that. So I just listening to what you were saying about rough trade and what you're doing, I think that kind of intersection between retail and leisure is a really interesting space, and something that increasingly is going to be in demand. And us as developers, we want to work with cool, independent, creative businesses like the rough trades, that they're not just there seeking to sell a product, but actually they're there engaging a local community, creating community, but also that it's experiential led. So I was listening to someone talking from Accenture about how millennials, 70% of millennials would rather buy an experience than a product, and that's only increasing with Gen Z. And so I think we need to be creating places that are theatrical, that are engaging, that are experiential led, because that's what people want. They don't want a cold, sterile, corporate environment. That doesn't create community. It isolates people. So I guess coming back to your point, what makes a great place? For me, what makes a great place is people. You can have the most beautiful building in the world. Hazel could design something absolutely magical, but if there's no one in it, technically it's derelict. And so for us, what makes a great place is people, but not just people. They need to be healthy, coming to Paul's point earlier, and they need to be positively engaged. So they need to be engaged through community, but they also need to be engaged by the architecture. The architecture needs to respond to its locality, so it needs to embed itself in the urban grain. It needs to embed itself in the kind of local architectural vernacular, so it's not just completely dropped from space into a town or a city. But then the developer needs to do that kind of extra piece of work in terms of that community curation, animation, engagement, so that actually what you don't just finish and you finish the bricks and mortar and you walk away, but actually for us, we know we've finished when, I look at the Littlewoods development, for example, which is one of our schemes. I know I will have successfully finished that scheme when child poverty is dropping significantly in those wards, when engagement in education is on the rise, when the number of households without anyone in employment is dropping through the floor. And all of those things are happening because we've created an engaging development that isn't a gated community. Coming to Hazel's point earlier, we don't want gated communities that shut themselves off from the local population. But for us, we want to draw in young people, genuinely, disengaged young people, to upskill them, to reskill them, and to put them into employment in a sector that's absolutely booming. It's grown 10 times the rate of the wider UK economy for the last 10 years. And so for me, that's when I know that we've successfully finished a development, when I see those metrics shifting.
So, because you've touched on social impact there. for a number of years, I don't, because obviously I'm not in the development space. But has social impact always been a thing, or is this something that's just, you would say, the past 5 to 10 years have been something that you would measure if you were going to a new area, you know, that is low socioeconomic?
I think it's a really, really good, pertinent question. I think we've been talking about social impact for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
We've been doing it, not just talking about it. And actually, we want to hold ourselves accountable. So it's not just us saying we are social impact developers. So we have a framework that we've built with the Good Economy, who are social impact consultants from London. And so we've built a framework where we assess all of our developments pre-investment. We assess on a whole host of metrics, and we will score our developments. Either it's a fail, bronze, silver, or gold. Okay. And if it's a fail, we won't do it. And then we've kind of embedded that social impact metric in terms of the ongoing measurement of it in our own kind of financial returns. So they are pinned against that social impact measurement framework that we've created, because there are a whole host of social impact developers who've just kind of crawled out of the woodwork, who are I was listening to someone talking about their social impact development, and it was care homes. And it was because it had the word care in it that it was social impact. And it's like, no, you're not doing anything different to what you were doing before you decided to call yourself a social impact developer. You can't just literally stick that label on and, you know, assume that people are going to buy into this. It can't be tokenistic. We can't just sit here and say, yeah, we're social impact developers, and expect everyone to just pat us on the back and say, well done. There's got to be that kind of independent assessment of it. And the problem with social impact is social, you know, ESG, the E and the G are quite easy to assess. The S is so ethereal, and that's why we ended up having to go and create this piece of software that assesses all of our schemes, because to drill down into what is that social impact, what does it look like, how do we ensure that we're delivering it and measuring it and continuing to measure it post practical completion. For us, that was absolutely central to being able to actually hand on heart say, yes, this is what we do. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think there's a lot of social impact development that goes on, but it's only in name.
Hazel, I'd love for you to, similar question. Social impact, do you guys measure it? If so, how has it changed how you work?
Yeah. I'm not sure it has changed how we work in so much as I think we've always tried to bring that aspect to our projects. But what we did do last year was we became a B Corp. So
and that's tough.
Yeah, and it's a tough process to go through. But it also means that we're now accountable. So, you know, I think that was a really good move, because we now have to present what we do every year. So, again, you know, it's kind of software driven. But I think what happened to us was at the same year as becoming a B Corp, we became an EOT, so an employee-owned trust, which means that everybody feels part of what we do, and everybody's accountable, really. And I think it's kind of widened what people do individually as a practice.
Amazing. Paul, can I come to you? With Farm Urban...
Can I sneak in with a little question to them too while you're thinking?
You can sneak in.
So this whole question is really interesting to us, because we're trying to sell in products and services that are social value products and services, or ESG products and services. And it's been an interesting couple of years going on that journey and learning what that looks like, what metrics are real and what aren't, and who's putting the money where the mouth is and who's not. But I kind of got this like fundamental question on it. Like, do you have to compromise on the bottom line to achieve the social aims? And I was having a conversation with someone from NatWest before, and he was talking about how the property sector, it feels like it's splitting off a little bit. There's like, with the incoming BNG and policy, It's like the old school people are like, I'm not doing any of that. I'm used to making 7 figures on any deal. And it's like maybe there's a new generation who want to make 6 figures, but they buy into the ESG more. So that like granular, do you have to compromise the financials to achieve that?
I think if the answer to that is yes, then I think we can kiss goodbye to ESG. Because I think we are all businesses, and like you were saying earlier, you've got to make a profit to keep the lights on. And if you're going to deliver lasting social change, you've got to be able to make a profit to deliver that over time. So I think the answer to that has to be no. It can't mean that you essentially don't make a profit, because otherwise you can't sustain it. And actually for us, I think we see it as the opposite way around. We see that good development is accretive to value, but only on a long-term basis. So for us, we want to come in, we've aligned ourselves with patient equity, so we have pension fund backing, and that means that we can come in and we can take a 40, 50-year view of value creation, which means that I'm not looking at kind of bottom line, day one, smash and grab development, like I'm going to just fling it all into the market and run off in the other direction. We want to be there, and we want to run we want to own all of our developments, and we want to run them and do that community curation and animation piece long into the future. And I think actually we see it as almost the polar opposite, that we see that there's a kind of a defense mechanism embedded within the stuff that we're doing, in that we're going into locations where there isn't any aspirational residential development to date. And so when we arrive and we deliver something that is a massive step change against the local market, whatever's been delivered to date, we know that we're going to be there long into the future. And as long as there's a couple of hundred people who want to rent a home in that location, we know that from a demand side, we're sorted. Whereas if you're developing the same product in central Manchester, someone's going to land next door to you and build a 50-story tower, and they're going to have a shinier product or whatever the latest gadget is in terms of tenant amenity. So for us, we'd rather be in all of those developing locations where we can create the value in that wider area and capture that in the long term, rather than just try and compete on price in all of those kind of well-trodden geographical locations where someone else is going to drop on your doorstep with a massive tower at some point. Does that answer?
So I was going to ask you that question for you to ask. That's what I was going to do.
What?
Yeah. It was telekinesis. There's a telepathic. That's what it was. Yeah. Coming to Dave. So we've got developers, architects who, develop spaces, places. But in terms of rough trade, as a company, how do you plan your location? Because obviously Liverpool's a big place, Nottingham's a big place. How do you plan? And where you want to go next?
I mean, it all starts with kind of the place, I guess. We need there to be some kind of need for us to be there, because we need there to be a customer base. You don't open a business where you're not going to have people coming through your doors. Yeah. We obviously look at, a level of musical heritage within the city, so it's something that links quite closely to our brand, for the same reason, And I think we look for somewhere where us being there will be a benefit to the local community, rather than it just being another of another of another of another. And it goes back to that whole combined kind of leisure retail space. It is the way that retail is going, because in order to combat things like sky high rent and sky high rates, you need something else as part of what you're doing in order to get footfall, offer something different. And we do a weird kind of experiential retail. And that's absolutely what's happening, particularly in London at the moment. If you look at somewhere like Outernet, in Soho, that it's built around the fact that it's got the biggest LED screens in Europe, purely to deliver experiential retail, aside of having a 2,500 capacity music venue underneath. And they're really betting on the fact that, you know, there's thousands of arenas and music venues in London, but they're betting on the fact that experiential retail is what's going to drive it forward. So we need to be able to offer some experiential retail somewhere that people are going to want to come to it. And without having a vibrant local music scene, a community that wants us there, and somewhere where there's great musical heritage, where we're going to get some footfall, I guess they're the kind of the three things which we need in order to, you know, go into a location and decide that, you know, this is where we want to find a site to move into. This is a community which we think we can really, really support and help grow. And this is where we can sell some records as well, you know.
Because I know the day that you opened, there was a queue of people waiting already.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, these guys must be shit hot. Oh God, they're recording. I should stop swearing. Paul, when it comes, you know, you talked just before about, you know, having those conversations with venues, properties to kind of have farm urban there. What would be the dream goal in terms of farm urban? Not just in Liverpool, but in terms of places, people, community. Where would you like to see it?
So I think the way we think about what we've done in Liverpool over the last 10 years, it's been like a big experiment, and it's been a big test bed for us to learn and try and deliver lots of different things. And I think over the years we've been kind of questioned and criticised, like, well, are you a tech company? Are you an R&D company? Are you education? Are you farmers? And well, Jens and I and the rest of the team are quite firmly committed to the fact that to bring about this like longer term, 40, 50 year societal change, you've got to be embedded at multiple layers. And it's made it much harder for us, but we know we've got killer primary to pensioner education programs, amazing products to go into businesses. And the one that's left for us to crack is that kind of leisure space. Like, how do we take what we're doing behind the closed doors and make it more experiential? So our vision for the future is cities that have got what we call our urban oasis on the rooftop or even ground level location, which brings together vertical farming, other types of urban farming, education, F&B, maker spaces, some like local retail, and it's a true experience around sustainability and health, but again, not in that preachy way. Yeah. And then local schools delivering our education content, and then local homes are getting deliveries of Greens for Good in boxes. So for me, it's like, it's those kind of 3 or 4 layers, and taking like a sort of city or a part of a city approach that were really embedded in lots of different ways.
What type of veg are you growing?
So at the moment we grow mainly leafy greens.
Okay.
So that's where the technology is most comfortable. So like salads, chards, kales, any kind of herbs. Scouse saffron was a good one. Like I said, that's where the technology is most comfortable. But it's also, there's some of the most nutrient dense produce, like, you know, weight. Like vitamins per weight of produce. Okay. So like getting that food into people is really, really important. And there's some of the most highly wasted produce, so the shelf life's really short. So it makes sense for us to focus on them. But we're doing research into different crop varieties, and we'll kind of expand that out over the next few years.
Okay, interesting. I've got no more questions. I'm only joking, I've got loads. Why do you keep on looking at me questions?
The answer to that.
You are the answer. So, John, how important is community in the success of a new development? And what, did I ask you this already? And what does CNC do in addition to simply providing the bricks and mortar? I think you answered that question about the community. I think you did.
I mean, I think the answer is, yeah, obviously it's massively important. It's central to everything that we do. In that, like I said earlier, what makes a place great is people, not necessarily just buildings.
So,
although Hazel's buildings do make a place great as well.
Give us What projects have you worked on? Do you have names? I want to try and picture them.
In Liverpool or
Liverpool, the Northwest.
so in Liverpool, the obvious one is the Littlewoods building on Edge Lane, which is
Yeah.
you know, a big scheme. It's film and TV campus. It's 4,000 jobs. It's 200 million a year to the economy. So proper transformational change.
It caught on fire, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
So post catching on fire, are you way behind schedule or are you on schedule? That's a good question, isn't it?
Schedule's a $1 million question when it
Or
comes to
human
Littlewood's development. What I've learned is that if you're going to be working in development, you have to be patient.
Yeah.
Nothing happens overnight. And for me, I think, in my experience, the things that are hardest to do are the things that are most valuable ultimately. And if that's any metric of value, then Littlewoods is going to be absolutely incredible because the challenges have been off the scale in terms of, we've had a number of traveller encampments on site, we've had arson attack, we've had, COVID.
It's by my house. Like I'm the opposite way, but I think it's one of those buildings that you look and you think, oh God, that's not going to be finished for at least 5-10 years.
No, it will be finished earlier than that, I can assure you. We're on site, there's scaffolding up, there's stuff happening on site. It's very genuinely really, really exciting. And so I think it's going to be so symbolic of the city's kind of regeneration when you drive in. 17 million people drive into the city every year down Edge Lane, past that building. And some of those are fund managers who make critical decisions on inward investment, whether they put it into Liverpool or they put it into Manchester or Newcastle or Sheffield or wherever. And at the moment, that building is kind of symbolic that Liverpool has failed as a city to regenerate a truly iconic building for the last two and a bit decades, because it was vacant in 2003. And that's not any one person's fault. It's just an incredibly complex and difficult building to bring back into use. But the great thing is we have an industry that, as I said earlier, is absolutely booming, and the city is incredibly strong in it as well. Most film city outside of London, we have 1,300 days of filming every year. The issue is that on average they only last 3 days in the city because they disappear off to London or Manchester to do all their interior shooting, which is when really the massive economic gain is felt.
Studios.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So £1 spent in a studio equates to £18 spent in the wider economy. So when you have those kind of metrics, you need a collaborative approach between the public and private sector to get something like that off the ground, because it does far more for the city than it does for the site economically. I
know, so interesting. Did you know all those stats beforehand? Because now it's like you're a movie buff in terms of production. It's like, listen, we need to get this off the ground because we're losing some serious wonga.
No, the irony is I'm like the polar opposite of a movie buff. So like, when I've sat with people in the industry and they're kind of saying, oh, and you've watched such and such film, and it's like, I know a lot about the industry now in terms of production and all of that. And I think the most interesting thing about the industry for me is social mobility. So many, I've been to the film festival and chatted to lots of very senior people in the industry, and most of them say, I started out as a runner or something like that, and then they retrained and they upskilled and they became something else, and then they have this kind of continuous growth through, and now they're running a production company or they're head of whatever. And for me, that's the really exciting thing, that what we're bringing to the city is something that will give everyone a kind of a route in, because there's such a broad spectrum of skills that are needed for production to happen on site, that there is something for everyone, whether you're a local beautician that can be retrained as a visual effects makeup artist, or you're a carpenter that can become a set builder, or you're at the other end, highly skilled post-production jobs. So there is a real kind of massive spectrum of skills that are needed.
Questions? Do we have any questions? Oh, behind you, Fiona. Oh.
Hi there. So my name's Daniel. I'm not from Liverpool, but I've lived here for about 15 years, so I've seen a lot of change in the city. It's a question for Paul, for John and Hazel, really. You touch on social impact, and you obviously have these different metrics, things like child poverty, unemployment rates that you measure after you've worked on a development, I believe. Is there anything within that that looks at whether it's the same people you're measuring these metrics against? Because in my experience, unfortunately, development often leads to displacement of people and replacement of them from people from other or higher demographics, social demographics. So do you have that level of granularity in those metrics?
Do you want me to think? Okay, fine. So just to clarify, those metrics that I quoted aren't necessarily metrics that sit in that social impact framework. So there's a whole kind of spectrum of different metrics. And to be fair, it's not something that I've kind of delved into the detail. That's someone else in the team that's kind of run that project. But how do we ensure that we're not displacing people? I agree. I think it is a central question. So again, just picking the Littlewoods development as a kind of useful barometer for that. How do we ensure that we're not creating a kind of gated community of highly paid creative jobs that don't engage local kids? And I think for me, that's that skills piece, that there's got to be a skills provision that sits alongside what we're doing in the kind of built environment that then ensures that we're into local schools, which we already are, on a regular basis, talking to kids about what's coming in film and TV in the city, and we're not trying to tell them rocket science. There's it's tangible. It's something that they understand and they can relate to, and ensuring that they're enthused about the future, and that they can see that there's a route to a fulfilling career. I think for me, that's got to be the key here, is that we've got to ensure that those local kids have access to the skills that they need to capture some of that benefit that is coming through the jobs that are being created. And I think just another example that I'd give you, because I think that narrative of gentrification pushing out arts and community, arts and culture. So we bought a building in Manchester called Crusader Mill. And when we got in there, we discovered that there was an artist collaborative in there called Rogue Artist Studios. And they weren't able to really engage with the wider community because they were a commercial tenant. They were trying to pay rent every month, and that was their focus. So instead of turfing them out, which we could have done because they were holding over, we kept them in for 2 years. We worked with the council. We found a building that they were gifted. We became their chief sponsor. We rebranded them. We worked with them. And so now they've got their own building. So they've got a stable long-term future. And as a result, they're now able to invest in outreach programs into the local community. And what they're doing now is transformational in comparison to what they were able to do before. And so the buildings benefit. So the built environment's been transformed, but also arts and culture has benefited from it. So I think there are, if the right approach is taken through the development process, both of those things can benefit alongside one another. They don't have to be at odds with one another, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think it's a really interesting question, and the word displacement is interesting in, most of the schemes we get involved in are derelict sites, so it's not necessarily about displacing anyone, it's more making sure that adjacent communities feel the benefit of the added value that comes to that site. But we do work with a wide variety of developers. Some of them are big funds, some of them are more social impact developers. And what I would say, especially post-COVID, is that there's probably a different voice that's being raised by the customer. The idea of displacing people is now, it's not it's not acceptable. You know, people don't want to buy into a scheme that's any place. They don't want a blank canvas anymore. They want to feel as if they're buying into a place that's got grit and grain and character. So I would say some of the developers, and I'm not going to name any, but some that are maybe more your institutional funds that might have in the past kind of thought that they could go in and create a blank canvas, are now the ones that are really seeing the value of working with the existing community. I'm not sure how it's measured. I'm not sure if it is measured, but there's certainly a change, I think. There's a sort of more of an uprising in what people actually want, what the customer actually wants.
Thank you.
More questions? More questions? Don't be shy.
You're going to have to find a question.
No? No? More questions? Are you sure? Right next to you.
Just a quick one. I'm curious about the development of the Littlewoods building. What's it going to include? What's going to be included in the development?
In terms of uses? So it's a film and TV campus, so studio spaces, but then the buildings, so the studios sit on the land to the east of the buildings. The buildings themselves will host it's a truly mixed use scheme, so it's workshop space for set building, it's production space for productions to use when they're using the studios, it's office accommodation for film and TV businesses, it's a kind of multi-purpose events F&B hub in the centre that kind of ensures that people genuinely meet one another and you get that germination and kind of flow through from education into employment. So there's a whole variety of uses in there.
If we've got no more questions, I'm happy for us to close.